Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and after a difficult weekend for Mercedes at the Belgian Grand Prix from start to finish, Toto Wolff has described exactly why it's so difficult for them to decide on what they want their concept to be for next season, not ruling out changes at all, but saying within the next few weeks they will have to lock in their decision. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below, hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always, plenty going on right now, especially in regard to the driver market. Mick Schumacher is no longer going to be from December 2022 part of the Ferrari Driver Academy family type thing. Therefore, it's as good as it's bad, whatever you think about that one. It does mean that he can go on to join teams that aren't Ferrari based, as in Alfa Romeo, as in, of course, Haas, the two Ferrari powered teams. He can now join another team. So many indications as to which team he's going to join, because the rumour has it that he's not going to be retained by Haas. For whatever reason, I feel like he's done rather well, but apparently they want to move on from Mick Schumacher. Supposedly, Antonio Giovinazzi, once again, is the favourite to land this seat alongside Kevin Magnussen. So I suppose we shall see about that one. But yeah, Mick Schumacher could be moving on from Haas. If that is the case, he's going to need to find another seat. The Williams seat of Latifi could well be open. We believe that he's probably not going to be there for next season. Of course, the Alpine seat as well is also a big target for the likes of Riccardo. Even Pierre Gasly, I think, would certainly prefer to be in the Alpine seat than to stay at Alpha Tauri. Now, apparently, there's been various rumours on this and definitely some conflicting reports, because this report states that Gasly is Alpine's priority and that Alpine want to get Gasly, and I think there's certainly at least some element of truth to this, because we've seen that Helmut Marko now seems rather eager to kind of spy replacements for Gasly at Alpha Tauri, of course, alongside Yuki Tsunoda. Now, there is supposedly a clause in the contract where, at least from the Alpha Tauri perspective, that they will release him if he does get a deal. I think that was the rumour, that there was a clause in his contract, Gasly's contract, that if a better team in the standings gives him an offer, then he can just leave effectively. But I think there would be some sort of buyout involved. Who knows? Now, F1 Insider says it's actually not Gasly who is the Alpine priority. It is instead Mick Schumacher, that we did hear a while ago. And F1 Insider actually reckons here in the replies that it's, from his perspective, a 70 to 75%. He's about that sure that indeed that's where he's going to be, right? And of course, well, Gasly is third option anyway, apparently, so he's unlikely to go. So these sources saying third option, other sources saying Gasly's the number one target. It's a bit of a confusing one, but it was confirmed actually that Helmut Marko has told the Amos guys that indeed if there is an offer from Alpine to Gasly, they will release Gasly from the contract if that was to be the case, because I don't really think they see much future with Gasly in the Red Bull Academy ride, trying to get the seat back of Perez, of course, but I think Gasly would be wise to move on. Whether Alpine want him, that's another question, because Michael Schmidt also went on to say he believes Riccardo will have difficulties finding another seat. That, of course, applies to Schumacher as well, with Haas, Williams, Alpine really the only notable seats on offer right now, because Joe is going to stay in Alfa Romeo to our knowledge. So it's a bit of a mess, to be honest. Which drivers are going to go where, who knows? But, Gasly to Alpine, those could be fireworks, because, two Frenchmen at a French team, that's always going to be spicy. Let's talk about Mercedes, right? A really challenging weekend for them, not just in qualifying, but also in terms of the race, right? It was George Russell did maintain, in fairness, his streak of finishing P5 or better when he does finish a race. Hamilton gets his first DNF, though, of the entire season, only his second DNF, I believe, in the last 4 years, after a mistake going into Le Com. Now, well, as Toto Wolff says, we need to accept the car is very difficult to drive, hasn't got the pace in a single lap, so we need to work ourselves out of this. And that's the thing, there seemed to be a lot of confidence from Mercedes after Hungary. They managed to put together a situation to stick it on pole, were competitive enough to at least compete for the race win that weekend. Of course, Verstappen made his way through the field and was pretty dominant in Hungary, and of course was completely untouchable in that Red Bull this past weekend at Spa. If Hamilton was still in the race, he might have ended up getting a podium, might have had the pace to overhaul Sainz, for example, but still, they would have been another podium maybe, and George Russell nearly got it without a couple of mistakes in the final couple of laps, but still nowhere near the top step of the podium, which of course is where they want to be. And the quali pace was especially shocking, really, especially because that's seemingly what they've been trying to work towards, because, you need to qualify well if you actually want to win a race from time to time. Toto Wolff, of course, had some pretty harsh words to say about the W13, and understandably so, saying it's certainly not going to have the highest place in the Mercedes-Benz Museum. It's, it's going to go down in the caves, effectively, trying to forget about it as quickly as it is possible to do so. And even Stoffel Van Dorn actually mentioning that there is already work being done on the car for next year, which obviously is the case. And of course, we've actually seen Hamilton not that long ago ago in an interview with Heikki Kovalainen, and he talked about the fact that he's in the factory a lot, telling the engineers what he wants from the car effectively, like how he would like it to be designed for next season. Because, of course, last year there was so much of the fight for the championship that I think, well, theoretically, both Mercedes and Red Bull kind of put their all into last year's title fight rather than turning their attention to 2022. As it turned out, it seemed to work out rather nicely for Red Bull regardless, and not so much for Mercedes this time. So Hamilton definitely has his ideas, and he also did indicate to his engineers, don't be stubborn about this car concept. If it's not the best concept, the no side pod design, let's get rid of it and go for another option. Now, the question is it that concept that is causing the problems, or is it just other problems with the actual design of the car itself, not necessarily the concept itself? And this is the concern that Mercedes are currently facing, and why they're really struggling to decide what they do. The problem for Mercedes is, if they do go for a Red Bull style car that looks like a Red Bull effectively, or a Ferrari style car that looks like a Ferrari, they're going to be far behind those teams in terms of understanding that concept. It's better in theory if they can double down on their current concept and make it work. The issue is, though, is that they don't really know if this concept is actually any good. It shows glimpses of potential, but it struggles massively with quali pace, tyre warm-up. It's quite good a few laps into the race when the tyres get warm enough and they can actually put in some decent laps. We've seen that a few times this year where they've been pretty competitive once the tyres are actually up to temperature and a few laps into the race with some heavier fuel load at the start of it. Outside of those specific circumstances, and especially on a weekend where it's cooler, they tend to really struggle. The only exception has been Hungary, really, and at times in Austria, where they managed to find something to make the car work well in qualifying. Outside of that, it's really never been the case, and it's just so inconsistent going from pole to 2 seconds off the pace within the space of literally one race weekend, even though a few weeks, of course, during the summer break is obviously not going to cut it. So that's the thing. Even if this car has the potential to be a race winner, it doesn't have the potential to be a consistent threat right to the top step of the podium. So that is their concern. Is this car actually okay, or does the W14 need to be entirely different? So this is the discussion that has been had here by Toto Wolff, saying that the deadline to decide what their car's going to look like is fast approaching, right? They say there's various cutoff points regarding the various parts of the car that need to happen in the next few weeks. You have to commit to a chassis concept, suspension layout, how you do cooling, radiators, integration of the engine. We have to decide in the next few weeks. He reckons September or maybe early October. So in the next 3-4 weeks, they're going to make a decision on what they do with their car. But of course, he was also against further regulation changes to maybe help him out a little bit, and went on to say, look, it needs to be carefully evaluated. We have these massive performance swings. So in this moment, to take a decision for next year, whatever it may be, like if we change the concept dramatically, how can you be sure that that is a better direction to go? Because clearly we've been starting a little way back, right? That's the issue. If they do go for another concept, that they will be behind the other cars. So maybe it's better just to double down. So that is the concern that they have. What should the mechanical aero balance be? What should the bodywork look like? These questions, like all these different pillars, they've got to decide. They've got to make a rather challenging decision at that. So this kind of a side-by-side of what the Red Bull looks like, at least from the top, compared to the Mercedes. Markedly different concepts. And the theory was with this Mercedes that it should be relatively slippery through the air and not particularly draggy because it has the smaller side pods. Turns out it's almost worked in the opposite way. So I'm sure they've got a lot to think about here. But in fairness, the small side pods really, like the weakness should have been that maybe the cooling was a little bit harder for the engine. Turns out that hasn't really been a problem. It's actually more the aero of the car that has been the key weakness. But also the tyre warm-up and these other things that they've really suffered with. So difficult decisions for Mercedes to make. And actually, Toto Wolff went on to say that one of the key reasons why they're getting it wrong is because there's a massive non-correlation, as he describes it, between what the car should do in theory and what it does in practice. They're still suffering this issue and saying, they're like, look, we just don't understand what is wrong with the car. Is it that the aero is bad? Is it the mechanical balance is bad? It's difficult to dissect. So this is the key issue, right? And is it actually a problem with the concept? Is it a problem with this particular car that they've actually produced here? Could this car with some changes be better? Who knows? But they've got to find a decision very soon indeed. And sometimes in the race pace, they're way faster because the tyres kind of, get in the right window and all of a sudden they're good to go. So it's a messy situation for them to decide. George Russell has said before that, like, look, he thinks they should double down on it. They've obviously got a good amount of understanding with this concept, and maybe it will just click one weekend, maybe next season sometime, and all of a sudden they're equal, if not the fastest car on the grid. I'm sure that's what they're hoping for, but Hamilton has mentioned in the past, like, look, guys, don't get stubborn about this concept. If it's not good, it's not good, and we should copy Red Bull and try and catch up effectively. Whether they'll do that, I'm not so convinced. I feel like they still still feel like there's potential here, but you know, they've got to make a risk-reward decision on what they want to do going into next season. So yes, undecided for now, but a decision will be made in the very short-term future within the next month or so. Effectively, Mercedes have to make their call. You'd imagine Red Bull are going to double down on their concept design and just upgrade it for next season, and Ferrari probably will do the same thing, but of course the next few races for Ferrari might also indicate what they should plan to do next year as well. And just to mention before we close out the video here from, well, of course, we go to the Dutch Grand Prix in Zaandvort in just a couple of days' time. Now, if you guys know the way this track is laid out, there's a relatively short straight where overtaking, it basically doesn't happen around this circuit, at least in previous regulations. I think it is probably more likely this time around with the new car concepts, and especially because they're looking to extend the DRS zone. So there's a really big banked corner before the final straight, and they didn't want to activate DRS on that last year because effectively you activate DRS, you get more speed if you're the car within a second of the car in front, but you also lose downforce from the rear wing, right? So maybe that could cause some safety concerns around a corner, but yeah, because it's banked, they probably think they can get away with it. So they're going to try it in FP1 on Friday and see whether we actually can get away with this, allowing DRS on that banked corner. And if they can, then you will unlock an extra couple of 100 meters of DRS, which should enable overtaking slightly easier into turn 1, theoretically. We'll see, of course, if they approve it, because they were going to do a fourth DRS zone, what was it, at Melbourne, around the kind of curvy straight at the back there, and they decided against it for safety reasons. So maybe a similar thing will happen here. But definitely intrigued your thoughts on all this in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new as always. Take care, and I'll see you next time.